Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is Scream Sister, your podcast dedicated to scary movies and scary books. I am your host, Valerie.
And I'm Veronica.
And we are here. We are fully into the month of December, into Christmas season. So just to sort of give you guys a little bit of like housekeeping on what's going to be coming down, this is our first episode of December, and then our final episode of December and of the year will be coming later in the month, and we'll talk about that more towards the end. But how are you doing?
I mean, as you know, our pet Athena, who would often barge in here during our recordings, we lost her, kind of a sudden onset medical emergency. So we're kind of dealing with that, but the kids are doing okay.
How old? So Athena was the dog, like Ronnie said, that used to just sporadically burst into our recording sessions. She's a sweet girl. How old was she?
We rescued her from the shelter, and she was I think it was 2 or 3 days away from being euthanized, because it's unfortunately not a no-kill shelter. So they practically gave her to us for free just to save her. So, and they estimated that she was maybe a year or so when we got her. So she was maybe 9-10 years old, not super old.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know what the lifespan is. So Athena was like a mix. She was
we think some pit bull and then maybe Labrador. I don't know. We were not really 100% sure. I mean, she had the body, the stocky body
build of a pit,
of a pit, and the head of a kind of a Labrador, like the ears, and
she was really sweet, and her presence will be missed. Every summer, Ron's family and my family, and then cousins, our parents, we all gather and we camp out in the hill country of Texas, and the dogs have always been part of that every year, and so she will be really missed come summertime when we would normally be used to seeing her. So Ronnie and I had kind of been like, hey, it's the last month of the year. Let's go easy on ourselves. Let's do some horror comedies and just lighthearted fare and go out that way. And so we go into
this movie.
Well, we kind of both did, because I was like, hey, I came across this movie and you're like, hey, that's so funny. That's the movie I was looking for. So let's do it.
Yeah.
But we go into these movies blind, just like we go into everything else. And so we're talking about, well, I'll let you go ahead and introduce it.
This time up, we watched 2023's El Conde. So this is pretty sure the most current movie that we've watched, because it just released into theaters on September 7th of this year, came to Netflix on September 15th. It is a Chilean film by a Chilean director. It has a runtime of about an hour and 50 minutes. So I think it's also the longest movie we've seen to date.
It did feel long, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I kept checking the time. I was like, how much more time? But anyway, the director is Pablo Larraín, I think is how you say his name. Was written by Pablo Larraín and also his writing partner, Guillermo Calderón. And it stars Jaime Vadell as El Conde Augusto Pinochet himself, Gloria Münchmeyer. And if I mispronounce any of these names, it's Google's fault, so don't come for me. Who plays his wife, Lucia Pinochet, Alfredo Castro, who plays Fyodor the butler, Paula Luchsinger, who plays Carmencita, the flying nun.
The flying nun.
Stella, oh God, I can't even read my handwriting. Stella Gomez, is it an M?
I think it's an N.
Stella Gomez as Margaret Thatcher. Which I was going to say feels like a spoiler, but, warning, we're going to be discussing.
Right.
Yeah, we're going to be discussing this movie, so there's going to be spoilers. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it, then come back, but you've been warned. So this film, and I spent the first 10 minutes, because it starts off with this unseen narrator who's speaking in a British accent of all things. So at first I was like, oh my God, did I pick the wrong movie? And then I spent 10 minutes fiddling with the settings, because I thought I have it on English subtitles. I have it
so did I. I was like, I don't want subtitles. I don't want it dubbed.
Yeah, it starts off in English. So it actually has several languages. It's got French in there, English, Spanish.
It's true, yeah.
And so I got this from IMDb.com. In the 18th century, Claude Pinoche, a royalist French soldier, is discovered to be a vampire and survives an attempt to kill him. Witnessing the French Revolution and the execution of Marie Antoinette, he fakes his death and flees abroad, participating in the suppression of revolutionary upheavals over the next centuries. Eventually, he ends up in Chile in 1935, joins the Chilean army under the name Augusto Pinochet. Rising to become a general, he overthrows the socialist government of Salvador Allende in 1973 and becomes the country's dictator, while demanding that he be addressed as the Count El Conde by his family. When authorities begin investigating his ill-gotten wealth and human rights abuses after he leaves office, he fakes his death again and retires to a remote farm. After 250 years of existence, he gradually loses his will to live, which worries his wife Lucia and his longtime butler Fyodor, a white Russian whom Pinochet has turned into a vampire also. And so this movie kind of picks up after the dictatorship has happened. He's kind of in secluded retirement, and that's
Because he's
kind of
believed
where
to be dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he faked his death, essentially.
And so this is where kind of the movie picks up.
And as Ronnie pointed out, this is Augusto Pinochet is at the center of this film, who was a real world figure. We were just going to touch on the history of him very briefly. We're like Ronnie and I have said before, we're not historians. This is certainly not our wheelhouse, but Google is out there, and so we're making use of it, same as anybody else can. And of course, all of our resources will always be available for you guys in our show notes. Augusto Pinochet, born on November 25th, 1915 in Chile, leader of the military junta that overthrew the government of President Salvador Allende. And then he was head of Chile's military government from 1974 to 1990. And during his dictatorial reign, tens of thousands of opponents of his regime were tortured. So this is all coming from Encyclopedia Britannica. Ron, I didn't know if there was other stuff you wanted to mention about him.
Like, his coup was aided by our own U.S. CIA. Yeah. And this, all ties into resources, because the rightfully elected president, Salvador Allende, the one that they overthrew, came from a kind of a socialist Marxist background. Wanted to change up how resources were allocated and accessed in the country, which of course, the US didn't want, because they wanted the resources. So yeah, the CIA helped kind of that overthrow happen. And then Milton Friedman, who was with the economic school at the University of Chicago, in an article that said, influenced by University of Chicago economists, Pinochet just kind of started the age of kind of an unfettered capitalism. There were no regulations in place. There was no kind of price control. So it was just like, if you had money, you were just able to do whatever. It was just kind of it kind of widened the gap between the haves and the have-nots, between the wealthy elite and the poor people. So
yeah, to what the point that Ronnie mentioned, once the United States and other countries were prompted to release formally classified documents concerning Chileans who had disappeared or were kidnapped and presumably killed by his regime, those disclosures brought to light details of Operation Colombo, in which more than 100 Chilean leftists disappeared in 1975, and U.S.-backed Operation Condor, in which several South American military governments coordinated their efforts to systematically eliminate opponents in the 70s and 80s. So we do not remain, unsoiled in this. And in a lot of the resources that I looked at today, as a matter of fact, there was a lot of references to Henry Kissinger and his support of Pinochet. And, that's worth mentioning. And I'm not going to bring it up, but there is an article that I looked at that we'll list in the show notes. But it is worth bringing it up just because Henry Kissinger just recently passed away. In 2005, the Chilean Supreme Court voted to remove Pinochet's immunity for illegal financial dealings, as well as for a case involving the disappearance and execution of at least 119 political dissidents, whose bodies were later found in Argentina. He was ruled fit to stand trial for those crimes, but he died the following year of heart failure, which is kind of alluded to in the movie. That's him, quote unquote, faking his death without ever having been tried for the human rights abuses that occurred while he was in power. So that's a little bit about that man.
What was your initial impression of watching this movie?
Well, like I was telling you before we started the session, initially when I wrapped up this movie, I was like, well, I have questions, but I didn't not like it. Like I was like, well, that was interesting. That was visually very beautiful, and we'll get to more of that. But I didn't know how I felt about it. And then in sitting with it more and more today, I thought, well, and also reading, like I messaged Ronnie, reading all of this stuff helps kind of put it in better context for me, kind of gives us a little bit of like framework for what it is we're watching. So I was able to appreciate a little bit more. It's definitely more dark comedy in the sense that's like, it's very gallows humor. Like it's very dark content. There was no point at which I laughed during this movie.
It's not that kind of comedy. No.
It's not ha funny at all. There were certainly some cheeky moments, and there were very, like, if anything was comical, it was the absurdity of what you're looking at on screen. The idea that Pinochet is this 250-year-old vampire, that's a comical premise. And every time I wrote down, anytime any of these fools took flight with their capes flapping in the wind, I always thought of, like, do you watch What We Do in the Shadows, Ron?
No.
You don't watch it?
No.
It's so funny. It's so hilarious. But anytime they would take flight, I would for people who do watch What We Do in the Shadows, I would think to myself, bat, which is what Laszlo says in that show. Anytime he morphs into bat form to take flight, bat. Anyway, you have to watch the show and then you would know. So yeah, but
See, that's kind of what this movie felt to me. I mean, it's more satirical for sure, and there's a lot of symbolism and metaphors in there. But if you're someone who is not, super well versed in Chile, in the Chilean history under Pinochet's regime, it's kind of like the movies that have a lot of Easter eggs that if you don't know kind of the source material, the Easter eggs are just going to kind of go by you. And you might say that might mean something, but you're not sure what it means. So that's kind of what watching this movie felt like it was. I mean, I have heard of Pinochet. I knew he was a dictator. Obviously, probably means he's not nice, because when do you ever hear of nice dictators? But like a lot of the specifics, like the dinner scene where him and his wife start dancing in that band kind of
yes
comes in. I thought, what the hell is but in reading, I read that was something that he would have like a band come in and play whenever like he entered a room or made an appearance. And it was just, sounds to me like just to feed his own ego and just to kind of mark his arrival. So, but yeah, not having known that scene was just kind of weird. After reading that, I said, oh, okay, now I know why that scene was there. But
and I kind of, because not knowing that at all, I kind of just assumed, I was like, well, maybe this is something that's not necessarily truly happening. It's just something that's metaphoric. And it probably was, but it is, as you point out, a nod to that reality, which I wouldn't have known. So yeah, I think I went in anticipating more haha funny, and this did not deliver on that necessarily. In doing my reading, I probably should have anticipated that, because, Pablo Larraín is the guy who brought us the movie Spencer, which I had totally forgotten existed, but the Princess Diana biopic with Kristen Stewart.
Did you watch it?
I did not finish it. I saw, because full disclosure, or, confessional time, I didn't finish it because I'm not a huge Kristen Stewart fan. I'm just not. But also B, it's not that I don't like Princess Diana. I do, but I also like the
well, it just feels like, is there anything else about her life that we don't already know, that we haven't been told?
Exactly.
But that's the only movie. I was looking at his Pablo Larraín's list of works
like his filmography.
I'm not familiar with this. I'm not familiar with his work at all. That's the only movie that I have at least heard of. But I've never seen anything else of his before this movie.
Well, I had also heard of Jackie, the other biopic he did about Jacqueline Kennedy with Natalie Portman starring in that role, and I did not see that one. Just, I don't know, like I like Natalie Portman. I don't like her in. Let me rephrase that. I like to see her in roles where she's a little bit stronger, and I think, like, having not seen Jackie, so I could be totally wrong, but just in what I saw of her portrayal of Jackie, it just seems so delicate, so frail, so fragile. That's the word I'm looking for, fragile. And I like Natalie Portman better when she's not in fragile roles. So that's me. But what I was saying was that both of those films, Spencer and Jackie, are very dramatic films where you've got these like rich visuals, and you've got scenes that are all about like these haunted women, these haunted characters. So honestly, I should have probably anticipated that this movie was going to kind of be in that vein, and not necessarily truly straightforward comedic. I thought visually, Ron, this film was stunning. What did you think?
Very stylized, all shot in black and white, except for, like, I think the very last scene was in color, but for reasons. But yeah, I thought the black and white kind of gave it a retro look, but almost like an old black and white 1930s or 1940s movie. Very stylized. So it was shot very well. I thought visually it was kind of a gorgeous.
It was beautiful, and I like highest praise that I wanted to get, because I went and dug, and the cinematographer on this film is Ed Lachman, who is the cinematographer on. I didn't know this. So he was the cinematographer on "I'm Not There," which is that Bob Dylan biopic. Far From Heaven, which I've seen, although I cannot for the life of me remember what that movie's about, but I have seen it. Carol, which I didn't see, and then The Virgin Suicides, which I'm a big, I think that's a beautiful movie. So yeah, visually, I thought this movie was stunning. The frames of this film, there are just some gorgeous images that I was still thinking about even today on a night's sleep. So I thought that those were really beautifully done, and it makes it feel very immersive.
What was the first shot or the first scene where you were kind of like, whoa, this is strange? Like the first one that kind of gave you a hint of what we were going to be in for the
Well,
rest of the
yeah,
movie?
yeah, I had to think about it. So in the beginning of the film starts, as Ronnie pointed out, where like the narrator of the film, and we'll find out later on who the narrator is, but the narrator of the film is kind of giving us backstory of Augusto Pinochet as a vampire. And so he gets his start as, like Ronnie
Which
said,
is
a French
fictional, by the
soldier.
way. That
Yeah,
part
which
of
is
it
fiction.
was fictional.
Right,
He wasn't
obviously.
French.
But yeah, so he starts out as a French soldier, freaking in the late 1700s during the
Like
time of
the
Marie Antoinette.
French
So anyway,
Revolution.
in that scene where he wakes up in some sort of clinic or something, and the nurses or the women at his bedside determine that he is something sinister, something evil, and he attacks all of them and just bludgeons this woman with a mallet
In the face.
and they show it, and it's so weird. And this is, again, and I'm jumping ahead here, Ron, but I wrote it down. I did make the note. This is where I think the decision to go black and white was really interesting, because I was able to sort of look at that scene. Normally that's the kind of scene that I would like shut my eyes and look away from, because nobody wants to see somebody bludgeoned with a mallet. That's just it's not my cup of tea. But I was just like so fascinated with this scene, and so I couldn't look away. I owe that, I think, or I attribute that to the decision to go black and white in this film, and kind of how that makes it potentially maybe more consumable for audiences. I don't know. What about you? Like, what was the scene that stood out for you?
There was that one, but I think the one that like I found even stranger was when he's witnessed the beheading of Marie Antoinette, and then he's there later, I guess, after the crowds have cleared away and no one's around apparently to watch him do this, but he's like licking the blood off the guillotine, which was just gross.
Well, I was also just like, that's dangerous. Like, what are you doing? Don't be licking the blade of the guillotine.
Number one, I wanted to know, like, how did he even get away after bludgeoning the poor lady? I think they were prostitutes, because he had bitten a prostitute the night before and then got beat up. But anyway, after he's bludgeoning the poor woman in the hospital, how did he get away? Like, there had to have been witnesses to that.
He may have killed them all. I don't know. Like,
and then again, when he's licking the blood off the guillotine, I mean, surely there's people still milling about. If the blood is still wet enough that you can lick it, there has to still be people milling around to see him. Dude, what are you doing?
That's the story of how Augusto Pinochet comes to be. He starts out as this French soldier, he fakes his death there.
Yeah.
And then years later, like 1930s, he turns up in Chile, where he joins the army and rises up in ranks, and eventually, overthrows the government, installs himself as dictator. Yeah, where this movie picks up is he's faked his death there to avoid being held accountable for his crimes. And so now he's in kind of self-imposed exile out in like a remote region, because he's presumed dead. And he longs to die because he feels humiliated by his country. And so then at that point, his adult children show up to kind of try and claim their inheritance. And so I was going to ask you, what did you think of his children in this film, his adult children?
They seem like the children of a dictator. Like, they're just very self-absorbed. They're just,
they're just kind of worthless.
Yeah, they're wondering why he's taking so long to die, because they just want, they want their money, they want their inheritance. They probably have no skills to do anything else.
No life skills whatsoever. Like, yeah, I thought that because of how just completely useless these people are, I thought that they brought the most comedic moments of this movie.
Yeah.
Like, they brought the levity, because they're just so stupid. and they're blabbering away to Carmencita and giving her like everything she needs to know. So, because they're too incompetent to even like successfully scheme their own inheritance out of their dying father.
Which actually, and that brings up the nun, because
I have a lot of questions about this person. I have a lot of
questions, and I went looking for like, okay, what was the significant, and I'm sure there, Latin Catholicism, the Catholic Church is very prominent in Latin America. I went looking for like, was there a specific relationship with Pinochet and the Catholic Church in Chile at that time? I couldn't really find anything, because I was trying to find like, what did the nun symbolize? I mean, obviously she symbolizes the church, but was it a question of corruption in the church? Because and who sent her? I wasn't even clear on who sent her. But anyway, she gets sent. Her goal, it seems, is to kind of exorcise the evil from Pinochet. Failing that, she's there to kill him. She arrives with a briefcase full of different size steaks.
She's like a slayer.
Yeah.
A nun slayer.
A nun slayer. She kind of spends her time questioning the family members and getting information about the wealth that he has, and she's also, the director kind of also uses her as to kind of just very nonchalantly inserting facts about the horrors that Pinochet did.
Right.
Kind of giving us little factoids about what he's guilty of. And she kind of always says it. And that's kind of not haha funny, but tongue in cheek, because she's usually saying it with like a bright expression on her face. And she's just like, oh yeah, and he killed thousands of people involved. But she succumbs to Pinochet. And
well, see, that's my question. Like,
that's where
was
I'm
it
like,
was it part
why?
of the was her plan to seduce him essentially and kind of make herself the sacrificial lamb? Was that always the plan? Did she kind of veer from the plan and like give
Yeah, I
into a
mean,
moment of temptation? Like,
was it a moment of her choosing? Did she choose that path, like you said, as a self-sacrifice in aid of the churches? Because the church apparently is after Pinochet's money as well, is what I
for
got
what
from it.
purpose? Like, that was my
I don't know.
question.
I
Okay.
don't know.
Well, damn it, Veronica.
Well, I couldn't find anything that specifically mentioned like the. So there's two options here. She either, like you said, it was a choice, a self-sacrificial choice that she made, which gives her own agency to do that, or did she get sidetracked from her mission? Was she corrupted by the power, or just by his charisma or whatever, which I didn't really think he had any? Was she seduced off of her mission? And that's where I'm not clear, like what the director
And is
was
that a
going for
broader
there.
metaphor for the Catholic Church?
Yeah, so
there you
that's
go.
kind of where I have a lot of questions about the nun, and I could not find any articles or reviews that answered that for me.
Well, that was like a huge question mark for me with this movie. I'm like, well, what was her role then? Because I mean, so throughout the course of this movie, she's kind of posing as an accountant. Like, she's shown up to do the exorcism, as Ron points out, but she's kind of posing as an accountant, trying to help the adult children sort out this mess and figure out where all of his hidden documents and accounts and whatever have
And
you
money
are
are, yeah.
hanging out. Yeah, but she's there to gather information, potentially do an exorcism on this dude or kill him. And so she, towards the end, kind of fails to do any of that because she's discovered by his butler, the white Russian guy. What is his name? Fyodor.
Yeah.
And so Fyodor eventually, like, he kills her. So there's an actual guillotine on the premises of this farm compound, and he very dramatically beheads her.
If there was some sort of symbolism in the way that he laid her in the guillotine, because most of the time people are like facing the ground and the guillotine chops their head off from the back. He had her facing up, so she sees it coming. She sees the blade coming. So I don't know, again, if that was intent. I mean, obviously it was intentional, but what was the symbolism there?
That kind of goes to a point that I wanted to bring up, talking about the violence of the film, because there's a scene where Carmencita's taken to the guillotine and beheaded, weirdly facing up. There's some really grotesque scenes in this movie that I thought were made even more grotesque. Because of the black and white factor, which I think allowed me to study these scenes more than I would if it was like color, where I would have like covered my eyes and looked away, which is weird. I don't know what that says about me, but that's me admitting my truth. There's a casualness with the way. What stands out for me is the scene, and this is at the beginning, where he lays the black horse, down in the guillotine. Because I guess,
why'd he kill that horse?
Well, so I guess it's either because they need the blood supply for the count, or maybe the horse is, I don't know, old and they're just putting it down. But I thought, like, it's just so casual. The way it happens is just like the horse is laying there and they just psh. So I mean, things like that, or like the scenes where they're carving hearts out of people's chests, like just
while they're alive
in their
conscious.
sleep.
And conscious.
So I mean, really grotesque stuff. I think, like, in that way, it does the horror genre proud, because like there's some really gruesome scenes here. And also, like, the absurdity of some of the scenes you're looking at, that you can't help but sort of laugh, and it's kind of macabre, but you laugh at it, where they like blend up the hearts and make like a heart smoothie and they drink the heart.
That's pretty well speaking to the dictatorship in kind of, the vampirism in general, literally, well, not literally, but sucking the lifeblood out of a country, out of its citizens, and carving the hearts out of the country, of the government, of a constitutional government, which Chile had up until the U.S. helped Pinochet overthrow. But yeah, I think it was, and I think I agree to your point that the black and white almost lends it kind of like a not a textbook. What am I looking for? Like a documentary almost type, but like a black and white documentary, so that
Mm-hmm.
it seems a step removed from just the gore that would have been there if it had been in color. Kind of
Yeah.
makes you feel like you can step back from it and observe it more objectively, almost more clinically. I
Yeah.
guess is the
No,
word I'm looking for.
that's a good way to think about it, because when I was thinking, what came to mind was like Kill Bill. You remember Tarantino's
Hmm.
Kill Bill
Yeah.
trilogy, and
Hmm.
like infamously, whatever, the crazy 88 fight scene that he shot in black and white, specifically so that he could keep the film's NC-17 rating. I feel like with the decision to go black and white here, because it's either like you can either, in scenes where there's gratuitous blood, gratuitous violence, it can either go one of two ways, in my opinion. It can either go full camp, like Evil Dead and like Shaun of the Dead, those kind of films, just
Hmm.
straight comedy, or it can go full horror, like, your more vicious, scary, graphic horror films of the genre. If you want people to be able to stare at, to really take in what they're seeing and objectively look at it and assess it and judge it for themselves, then maybe you want to walk the fine line of going somewhere in between those two, which I think this film accomplishes. I mean, it is cheeky. Like we said, it's not laugh out loud funny, but you are going to watch it and you are going to come away slightly disturbed by what you've seen.
Let me ask you
This
this.
is messed up.
This is a quote from the Variety article that you've linked in the show notes, but I just want to ask you something related to it. So the quote
Mm.
says, "Similarly, those who might have feared that a black comedy featuring Pinochet as a suicidal vampire would somehow humanize the dictator or lessen the gravity of his reign of terror can consider those fears quelled by the uncompromising grisliness of both theme and form." Did you feel that way? Did you feel like, because I don't know, I won't say that I ever felt sorry for Pinochet. I was hoping that Carmencita would follow through on her mission and do what, and so I was disappointed that she didn't. So I definitely wanted him to be punished, but I kind of feel, I don't know that I agree that he wasn't humanized a little bit when he's shown as an old man walking around with a walker. And I
Well,
don't know,
yeah,
do you agree that
I don't know that he, like, I
was
don't
he
know.
really held out as this
I wouldn't say that, like, I didn't necessarily have,
horrible person?
I thought that he was silly. And so maybe that's
Yeah,
a
that's kind of,
mistake, because it's like, if you want people to see the horror of what this man has done, and I think for people who are very well versed in that history, they will regardless, but for people who are less familiar, if you want to kind of effectively relay the horrors of what this man has done, like
it
I
kind of makes him, yeah, like you
it
said,
makes
seem
him silly. It reduces
frail
him
and
to just being
silly.
this silly man that just, isn't as dangerous and deadly as he truly was. And I honestly, I didn't come away feeling that about it until today when I was doing my research for this episode and kind of reading up on all of this stuff. And so and kind of coming to terms with all of what he was responsible for,
Yeah, because
again.
even in the movie, because throughout the movie, someone that we as the audience thinks is Pinochet El Conde is hunting, flying over the city, randomly choosing victims and carving their hearts out while they're, awake and alive. As the movie progresses, by the end, we realize that it hasn't been Pinochet El Conde doing that himself at all. It's been his butler. So it even kind of, the one thing that was happening in the movie that we could say, oh, that's horrible and you deserve whatever's coming to you, he's not actually even responsible for. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think, yes, he was in real life a horrible person who was responsible for a lot of deaths. I don't know that the way he was portrayed in this movie, kind of like you said, he just comes across as more silly. And so
Yeah.
I feel like that does kind of remove some of the gravitas of what he
Right.
did.
Right. Yeah. I didn't put this in my notes, but the scene where he ultimately, it's hard to say. Was it her plan? Was she seduced? I don't know. The Carmencita the nun falls prey to this aging, unattractive man's seductions.
Yes, that was not a pleasant scene. Thankfully, it wasn't more graphic, but
But
even
basically,
so, it was not pleasant.
she gives herself to him, and then he
In the
turns her.
biblical sense.
In the biblical sense, and then he turns her and bites her and turns her into a vampire. And so then we get this beautiful, very, again, stunning visuals, this beautiful scene of her flying through the air, because now she's a vampire, she can take flight. So I mean, again, kudos to the work of Ed Lachman on this film, because it's this weird, dark horror comedy that is just interspersed with like these beautiful, stunning visuals from the cinematography. Ron, I wanted to ask you, what did you think of so what we come to learn out by the end of the movie is that the narrator is none other than Margaret Thatcher. So what
And
did
I
you
had
think
been wondering, I was like, who the heck is narrating this? What British lady is narrating this?
It's
this
former
story?
UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. What did you think of that? What did you think of that revelation?
Well, I was surprised, obviously, because that's not where I would have guessed at all. Again, metaphorically speaking, kind of depicting Margaret Thatcher as the woman who birthed Pinochet, who's his mother. There's obviously a lot of. I'm actually surprised, or maybe it was in there and I missed it, that there wasn't more reference to the United States.
No, I don't think there was. And I noticed that.
Role in
Yeah.
this, because like in real life, when Pinochet, I think he was like in his 80s, at some point he went to England, to London, to have some surgery. And so that part where Margaret Thatcher, but not only her, our very own American US President George W. Bush Sr., both were kind of, because Spain wanted to extradite him for
To hold
crimes that he
him.
committed against Spanish citizens that were living in Chile at the time that he,
Uh-huh.
tortured or killed. So Spain wanted to get their hands on him, and Margaret Thatcher and George Bush Sr. were calling on, no, just send him back to Chile and let them try him there. I was surprised, that the U.S. didn't have that. He didn't depend, like I said, unless it was in there and I just missed it. But
No.
there was no obvious, reference to the United States role. But having Margaret Thatcher be his mother, kind of birthing him in the movie,
and caring for him. Yeah. There's a in the Time article that we'll link for you guys. Yeah, in the Time article that we'll link for you guys, it says that during the time that he was under house arrest in London in the late 90s, Margaret Thatcher sent Pinochet a bottle of fine scotch with a note that said, "Scotch is one British institution that will never let you down." But
never mind, all the people that he's murdering back home in the name, just because they disagree with his political ideology.
That was a very interesting and unexpected twist. I did not, when we see and come to learn that, like we come to find out that Margaret Thatcher in this film is also a vampire, and they kind of talk about how she was turned. She was I don't remember, like a English woman, English maid, something or other, but she similarly alive in like the 18th century or earlier than that even. She gets turned, and so then she eventually turns up and goes on to become the Iron Lady. So they kind of give us that backstory. But yeah, at no point did I ever see that coming. So that was an interesting twist.
The end of the movie, of course, Fyodor has killed Carmencita, and in retaliation for that, Pinochet kills him. Apparently not quickly with the guillotine, but apparently just saws his head off. We don't see it, thankfully, but you can hear him screaming. And he also kills his wife, who Fyodor, she had always apparently been after Pinochet to bite her and turn her into a vampire. For whatever reason, he always refused to turn his children, so they're all mortal. But Fyodor and his wife Lucia were apparently having an affair all this time, and Pinochet also, was it a sword? Drives a sword through her heart, so kills her.
Some sort of spear or sword or something or other. Yeah.
The kids are pretty much nonplussed about this whole thing. They just want the money.
They just want their inheritance.
The movie kind of ends with Margaret Thatcher and her son Pinochet going off. They drink the blood, I guess, of Lucia.
One of the vampires. Because they say, there's essentially no purer blood than the blood of a fellow vampire.
And it rejuvenates them. It makes them more youthful. So the end of the movie, and this is, I think, the only scene that's in color. We see a younger Margaret Thatcher with like a little boy, Pinochet, who's now, I guess,
rebirthed.
She's sending him off to school. And so what did you think about that ending? Because even in the movie, Pinochet avoids punishment, any kind of just punishment in real life. Apparently he also avoids it in this movie, and I found that disappointing.
Yeah. I mean, I was disappointed when there were two disappointments. I was disappointed when Carmencita gets beheaded at the guillotine, because I was thinking, whatever she's doing, whether she is symbolizing the corruption of the Catholic Church or what she was going to bring to light, maybe she wasn't. Maybe they were just going to pocket his funds. But I kind of thought that she would bring to light his all of what he'd done, and kind of unearth all of those documents and unveil his full level of corruption. So I was disappointed to see her killed, because I was like, well, I wanted her to get away. I wanted her to take those documents, and I wanted it to be the ultimate because she had said somewhere in the film how her role was going to be to aim for full humiliation of this man. And so that's what I thought she was doing when she sort of like
I had kind of been hoping that she had allowed herself to be turned so that she would be physically strong enough to kill him.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I don't know.
That's the thing. It's like, was that
It's
part
not
of her
clear.
plan all along? I don't know. But yeah, I had kind of thought that she would give him the ultimate humiliation because that seemed to be a way of affecting this man more
Hitting
so
him more
than
where it hurts than yeah.
Yeah, it's like he says in the film at one point, he's like, you can call a soldier a liar, but
A murderer.
calling a murderer, but to call him a thief, that to him felt more
Egregious,
of an affront.
yeah. More of an
Yeah.
insult, yeah.
But then when he is rebirthed essentially and gets to start all over and essentially presumably grow up and rise to power in another way, become a corrupt ruler in another way, that's kind of where they lead you to believe the movie is ending. It's disheartening because I think it just sort of acts as a metaphor that it's like evil never stops.
Yeah, the ideology continues.
Yeah.
Which we've seen because we both came across articles that even in Chile today, in recent pollings, a third of the Chilean population thinks that he was a great ruler for Chile and never mind the human rights. So and then that's probably why the ending was disappointing to me because it's too true to life because it does just kind of symbolize that those ideologies continue
Persist.
and
our human memories
the
are
world
short.
doesn't learn. Yeah, the world doesn't learn.
One thing I did want to mention, guys, again, from this Time article that we'll link for you, it does say in the article, Larraín himself is a bit of a lightning rod, at least in Chile. His father was the president of one of Chile's main right-wing parties, which supported the dictatorship, and his mother served as a cabinet minister in Chile's conservative government. It also says his mother was a mate, or is a mate. She's probably not still alive, right? I have no idea. Anyway, his mother is
old.
His mother is a mate, one of Chile's wealthiest families, if I'm saying that name right. And they have been accused of driving out indigenous people from their lands in that region. So there are left-wing Chileans who have questioned whether or not Larraín is the right person to even tell these stories in the first place, arguing that his family was insulated from the effects of the dictatorship. So, I'm not asserting an opinion one way or another on that. I have no idea. But I thought that was worth bringing up, and we'll reference that link for you guys.
Well, I think he had a good response to that, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember it exactly, but it was something to the effect of, you don't necessarily have to be from that. So I'm really paraphrasing people. You don't necessarily have to be from that injured party or that injured population, that oppressed population, in order to see evil. So, which I think is true. I mean, you don't have to. You can see evil. You know it.
Well, I think it's that article. I think the end of that article talks about, he's like, you just have to hopefully be brave enough to go there, to look for it and to face it. Final thoughts on the movie, Ron? Point blank, did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you think of it?
I won't go so far as to say that I liked it. It was interesting.
I didn't not like it.
Yeah, I didn't hate it. I didn't, but definitely is not like my favorite of the ones that we've seen. This is also a quote from that Variety article that I think probably sums up my thoughts. And it was talking about like approaching viewing this movie. And it said, run the gauntlet if you dare. And if at the other end you emerge dazed and disturbed rather than straightforwardly entertained, perhaps those are just the splinters you get when you try to stake a vampire. So I would say dazed and confused more than dazed and disturbed for me. But I think that's a pretty apt description of how I left that movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel about it too. Like I didn't not like it. And again, visually gorgeous film.
Yeah,
but
stunning.
I don't know necessarily that this is one that it's like, man, I want to rewatch this. Like I'm rushing to rewatch this one. I can't envision a time when I'd be like, I'm going to put this on for some lighthearted viewing. So yeah, just a reminder, guys, we'll link all of those resources for you guys. Please go give it a look because there's a lot of good reading here. And so if you are interested in understanding the history of this particular figure and the history of this violence for the people of Chile, then give it a look and dive deeper. One of the fun things that has kind of happened for me in this podcast, and I don't know if Ronnie feels the same way, but I kind of like that we've just sort of there are some weeks that we just sort of accidentally stumble into, well, this week we're going to be little history researchers and we're going to.
That's what I have always liked, though, about, well, more so for me, historical books, but historical movies, obviously, also. But it can spark a curiosity about something that you then will motivate you to go and read up more about. Oh, that's one other thing. Somewhere in there, the narrator, the Margaret Thatcher narration, when she mentions that Pinochet needed a woman, when he came to power, he needed a woman at his side, so he married Lucia. And she said something to the effect of, like, who was quite possibly even more perverse or deranged, or I don't know what adjective she used, but worse than Pinochet. So that made me curious. So I went looking, well, what did she do? But I really didn't have a lot of time to really dive too deep. But just in my initial search, I couldn't really find anything that specifically mentioned anything that she did other than just wildly spending a lot of money on clothes and homes and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, just greedy and power hungry. Yeah.
But yeah, that's the great thing about historical movies, books, is that, it can just kind of spark that drive to go learn more, which is always a good thing.
Now that we're getting into like other stuff, is there anything else that you've been taking in this week? Other TV, books, whatever else you might be looking at?
I have about 3, maybe 4 including an audiobook that I'm halfway through all of them. Mm-hmm. And I just have kind of stalled. And it's not that I'm not liking them. It's just, I don't know, I just kind of like lose forward momentum. And then I'm just kind of stuck there in limbo. So I'm like halfway through all these books that I need to push myself to finish. Because I also have to start our next book. I haven't started yet.
I have finally started that. I think I'm like on the 3rd chapter. So everyone, just to remind you all, we're reading Peñata by Leopoldo Gaut. And so the idea is that, we invite you along, read this book with us. You're part of our book club, whether you like it or not. Read this book with us. And then tune in when we discuss it on the podcast in January. We'll have a book club episode where we'll talk about it. So that is our pick right now. But yeah, I've been reading that. I did just wrap up Mexican Gothic, Ron. Had you read that one yet, or is it on your to-be read pile?
It's on I think I own the book. I just haven't read it yet.
I really liked it. It was cool.
It's not like Vampires of El Norte, is it?
No. And if you walk away with problems from this book, then I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what there is for you. But because I think it dives into like horror and fantasy a little bit. So there's a blending of those genres and so kind of sci-fi too to boot. So kind of just a really cool story. And this is, I'm sure this is like embarrassingly late on, I'm very late to the party. I think Mexican Gothic came out like during the height of the pandemic, I want to say. So it's been out for a while, but it's Silvia Moreno Garcia, everyone, for if you're not familiar. But I thought this story is just visually very out there. It's a wild book. And so I really enjoyed it a lot. And I know that like Hulu had bought the rights to this. Oh, really? I think one of the reasons that prompted me to be like, okay, I got to get this read is because I had heard that Hulu was going to like turn it into some sort of limited series. But again, this was like during
Is it kind of like a Rebecca, not a retelling, but kind of an homage to Rebecca, or no?
I don't know, because I've never seen Rebecca.
Never seen Rebecca? Oh
I've never seen it. But
all right, we'll scratch that question.
Okay. But I thought it was really great. And so I'd be curious to see when it comes to TV, and which prompted me to think, because I was realizing this happens to me quite a bit. I'm beginning to notice that when I really, really like a book, I'm very itching to see the screen adaptation of it, which I know isn't not every book needs to be turned into a movie or should, but is that ever the case for you, Ron? Do you prefer?
I'm always like, I would love to see it adapted, but I'm always leery because it's rare that you see it adapted well. Because Hollywood will always put its own little spin on it. It's a double-edged sword. It's like you want to see it, but if it's not done well, then I'd rather not. But you don't know until they do it.
Off the top of your head, and not Lord of the Rings, but off the top of your head, what screen adaptations out there can you think of that you think
To Kill a Mockingbird?
Really did? Okay. To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm trying to think if they're like. I remember, I don't know why this is in my brain, but White Oleander, which is it was a great book. I don't necessarily feel that the movie, measured up, but because I love Michelle Pfeiffer so much, and she can do no wrong in my book. And I thought, I like the movie just on the basis of the fact that she's in it. But did it do the book justice? I don't know. I don't think so. So I'm trying to think. But like, there's so many others, I'm sure. This one, if they do it right, if they do Mexican Gothic right, it would be awesome because I think you should just dive in and read it, Ron. I think you'll like it. I think it's an interesting story.
All right. Coming up next episode.
Yeah. So, okay, everyone, the final episode of 2023, we're going to be coming to you on Christmas Day. So we are releasing an episode on Christmas Day so that, whether you're spending it with family or friends.
When you get tired of your family.
When you get tired of everybody.
Go
or
hole
if you're
up
by
in
yourself.
Your room. Go hole up in your room. And
just know that you have us and you can tune in and listen to us. We are going to be talking about Satanic Hispanics. That is available. That's streaming
Christmas
right
classic.
now. At Christmas. It's a Festivus for the rest of us.
Actually, I have no idea what the movie's about.
It's a horror anthology, everyone, for those of you.
It's an anthology. Okay,
it's an anthology. So it's a bunch of various stories, all Mexican film directors. We'll have the full lineup of that when we meet next for that discussion. It's available. I believe it's on Amazon Prime. I think you can get it there. It's streaming. Everybody go watch and then join us on Christmas Day. Okay, we'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
Ciao.
Scream Sister is a Nest production hosted by me, Valerie, and Veronica. Editing by me. Music by Omar Chakor. Production support for this episode provided by Lorenzo Villarreal and Alex Street. Listen to new episodes of Scream Sister every other Monday, and don't forget to give us a rate and review. It is the best way to help us grow.